Today we are going to see one of the services offered by AWS, that is AWS Security. Under AWS Security, you have identity and access management. It is very much analogous to what we can do in the on-premise world, and you get almost all the features plus some additional advantages also. So let's go ahead and deep dive into IAM as it is called. So that's my name. So this is going to be the brief agenda. What is IAM? What are the basic concepts or components that are made up of in IAM? The common use cases and how we can use those use cases in our day-to-day life. And finally, we are going to do a demo and show and tell how to do that in real world. So, of all the administrative and security services offered by Amazon, we are going to look at IAM in particular. That is going to be our focus. There are many other things like CloudWatch and CloudTrail and Trusted Advisor, all form the administrative and security layer of Amazon. We will come to them later. So, today's focus is going to be in depth on IAM. So you can consider IAM as the front door to your Amazon. If you have a cloud like this, and if you want to access your cloud, IAM provides you the keys to the cloud. And remember, when I say keys, it is as good as having full access to your cloud, depending upon how your account is set up. So IAM is your front door to the cloud, and you need to guard it as you would guard your real house. So it is really important to decide who has access, what kind of access they need. And in the application terms, they will call it as authentication and authorization. So there are two different things. Authentication is whether the person is allowed to access your cloud or not. That is authentication. And when you're talking about authorization, what can they do in the cloud? So whether they can create a machine, destroy a machine, whether they can add storage, destroy a storage, or they can access only monitoring logs. So what they can do, that is what the authorization part. So with IAM, you can do both of them. So in short, this is a definition of or a one line description of what IAM allows you to do. It enables you to control who can do what in your account. So that is what I said, authentication and authorization. So it allows you to have fine-grained controls. That means that you can very specifically give access to a particular user, or you can go a higher level and say a group of people will have this kind of privileges in your account. So you can, there are multiple levels of controls that you can apply. You can apply them at a resource level or a group level also. And security is by default. What it means is every access is denied. So when you create a user ID, they don't get any access at all. It's not like a Linux or Windows. They will be put into a default user group or an authenticated user, or other users, they will have some access. By default, they don't get any privileges at all. You need to manually add, when you are creating a user ID, some privileges for that user. So that way everything is denied by default. So some of the components that make up of IAM is you must be already familiar with. Unless you are not working with on-prem, you will not be familiar, but most of us here have done some kind of work in the on-premise world, either at the storage side or the VMware management side or anything. So you will be familiar with what is a user, what is a user group, and what permissions you will need to set. If in the Unix world, we will do chmod 777 world read-writable permissions, or in the Windows world, you will do something like put them into authenticated users, then you will give them less privileges. Put them into administrative group, you will get full access to the system. So there is another concept called IAM roles. That means that an individual user can assume a role in the cloud world. I'll give you a real life example when you are talking in depth into the roles in a short while. For now, you think of there are multiple roles available. A DBA admin. Today I am there as an individual, but tomorrow I might become a DBA admin. So that is how you can think of roles in the cloud world. Authentication and authorization. So as I said, when I say authentication, we are trying to find out who can access it. And in Amazon, we can do that using the management console. That is, you can log into the cloud using your the familiar GUI that we use every day. That is one way. The other way is using AWS CLI or SDK. That is, you can programmatically access your cloud resources using the secret key and access key. Today, I will show you how to create your own secret key and access key so that you can configure it from your server and access them. And the authorization, or in other words, policies are JSON documents, that is JavaScript object notation. That is what a JSON means. It will be used to describe who will have what access on what resources. So it can be assigned to individual users, it can be assigned to groups, or it can be assigned to a role like a team lead or a manager can do only this much action. So you get all this fine-grained controls in IAM to restrict people on doing what on the cloud. So when it comes to users, there is a what part and the when part. So whenever an entity that represents a service, or whenever somebody or something wants to interact with AWS, then you'll go ahead and create a user. Typically, you will have a username and a console access password. And if multi-factor authentication is enabled, then you will have a key fob or a mobile device which will generate an OTP or a random number which you will feed into your server. So corporate accounts quite often will use multi-factor authentication, which will trigger you an SMS or an OTP, which you need to feed into the machine to log in. And when you want to do it, when you want a human or a programmatic access to be given to your cloud, then you will go ahead and create one. So for example, there are a couple of examples listed here. Say, for example, there's a new employee, Bob, requiring access to EC2 or S3, then you could go ahead and create a role or a user ID for Rob. And if Rob has created an application that stores data in DynamoDB, then you will create a role for Rob or DynamoDB so that DynamoDB can interact with other services. So that is when you will use IAM users. Groups, this is a very familiar concept. When you have an account or let us say a client ABC, and the client ABC will have a couple of teams. Let us call that team 1 is a DevOps group and team 2 as a test and dev group. So under DevOps group, you will have multiple users as it is shown here, and again in dev group you will have multiple users. So collectively what you will do is you will go to Amazon dashboard and you will create a group and manage the permissions at this level, and you keep on adding or removing users to this group. This way you don't have to assign individual permissions to each and every group. Automatically everybody under this group will inherit the privileges assigned to that group, making administration very easier. Very straightforward concept that we are all used to in the on-premise world. If anybody set up AD, it almost works on the same level. You can even integrate your AD also with Amazon IAM. So this is another way of setting up groups. Quite often this also is possible. You have a client and then administrators will be put in one group, developers will be in another group, and applications will be running under roles. There is a reporting application, console application, Tomcat, and all of them will have their own rules. So that is another way you set up your account in IAM. So whenever somebody comes and says, I want to set up IAM from ground, then you need to ask what is the organization structure they have and how the teams are organized. Then you choose the best way of structuring your groups and user IDs in the cloud based on that. When we are talking about policies, these are JSON documents. You need to know how to write a JSON document to write a policy correctly if you're writing it from the scratch. But Amazon has made it easy because a lot of people might not be familiar with writing JSON properly. So Amazon has written some pre-written policies. In other words, pre-formatted and ready to use templates are available. So you can go ahead and just choose them by searching for their name or the definition of what is done inside the template itself. But if you're familiar with how to write a JSON, you can go ahead and write your own custom policies, or you can take Amazon's default policies or template policies and customize them even further. So there are no permissions by default. Remember that is almost always constant. That there is no change to it, whether you use the default policy or whatever. Any user that is created or any group that is created will not have any policy associated with it by default. The user who is creating it will have to assign the policy to that user or group. And when you're assigning a role, it can be assigned to an individual user or it can be assigned to a group or a roles. As you can see here bottom, Chitra, let us say that is a UX designer or front-end designer needs access to Amazon S3, you will create only these permissions for Chitra. Whereas Mr. Prasad, who is a database administrator, needs access to EC2, RDS, so he will be given access only these two services and not to any other services. So likewise, you can again write policies specific to individual users or a group of users. So in a typical policy, these are the components that needs to be definitely there. On the left hand side, you have there's multiple items: who, what, which, when, and where. So typically, the who is what is the name of the user ID or name of the group who is going to have this policy assigned to, and what actions they can take. Whether if in this case, Chitra, who is a UX designer, needs access to S3. So we are saying give Chitra get and put access. That means that upload and read objects from S3. We are not giving any delete options, if you can notice here. And what AWS resources, we are saying that all the buckets. Is there any particular bucket Chitra is restricted to? No, because it is we are giving a star value here, so Chitra will be having access to all the buckets. And you can also define how long this user ID has to be active. Say for example, you are needing to share some object with your client, and you want to give them only 24 hours to download that object. So you can create a user ID and password for them and ensure that by adding additional policy saying it should expire after a certain date, that user ID will stop working, or the permissions assigned to that user ID will stop working after the particular date. So that is also possible when you are doing policies and permissions. So you can restrict it only from certain user IDs. Say if your client has to come from particular user ID, or your corporate employees have to come from particular user ID, you can give an IP range so that all those people coming from that range will be restricted to that one. Of course, this IP range is wrong, but the idea is to show here that you can mention IP ranges. So finally, how they want to access, whether they want to access it from a particular browser or from console or programmatic, that also you can mention how they want to access. That is also possible. So these are the different items that comes in a policy, but basically it will definitely have these two items at a bare minimum: who and what actions they can take. And if you want, you can mention the resources also, whether it is S3 bucket or DynamoDB or EC2 or all resources. That is also possible. You can say ARN equal to Amazon and star there. All the resources in Amazon will be given access. So this is how a JSON policy looks like for the same thing that we just now spoke about. So typically, I try to remember that as parse. Let me try to highlight it. There's the principle, that is who can access it and what action they can take and against what resource they can take, and whether the effect is allowed or denied. You can specifically write a deny policy also for some users. So that is what the effect field means: you allow or deny. And this is just a definition of the policy statement. You can have a custom statement also. So if you are ever going to write JSON policy, typically you will have to write these three elements, that is principle, action, and resource. And if you want, you can have the effect also explicitly written as allow or deny. So all of these things will go into your policy document. So when should I use inline or managed policies? Remember I spoke about Amazon written templates. They are called as inline policies. I'm sorry, they are called as managed policies. I just got the term changed. So when you are writing your own policies, it is called as inline policies. As you can see here on the left hand side, you can write your own inline policy, or you can use the default managed policies provided by Amazon. So the reason it is called as managed policies is any change in version numbers or new services introduced, or there is some minor bugs or errors are there, Amazon would automatically go ahead and change the policy. You don't have to do anything on your end when Amazon changes it on the background. So the changes will get affected on your account instantaneously. So everything related to that policy is managed by Amazon itself, and that is one of the reasons it is called as managed policies. So when you're using managed policies, there are multiple advantages to it. So The advantages is reusability. That means that the policy is available in all your services, and you can go ahead and reuse them in any of the service that you want. There is no restriction on how you want to use them. And as I said, it is centrally managed. It is managed by Amazon's teams, and versioning and rollback is all done by Amazon itself. When I talk about versioning, the reason is it all happens with API calls on the background. So it interacts with other services and applications using a particular API version. So in case there is a change in the API version, and instead of putting A in a place and you need to start putting B, Amazon will go ahead and make the changes to the policy, and it will interact with the background services without any errors. And Amazon takes care of this versioning and rollback of old policies, and upgrading them if there is a necessity, or removing any bugs are there. So all of these things are done by Amazon itself. And there is a one tricky aspect of it. There is a size limit on the policy. If you are writing your own inline policy, what happens is there is a size limit. If I remember correctly, it is about 64 KB of space is given to you. You can go ahead and check this fact, but one thing is for sure, there is a size limit, and you will have to write your policy within that size limit. And remember, in a notepad file, if you start writing 64 KB is quite a lot of text, so you should be able to write an effective policy within 64 KB. But in case if you have to go over it, then you will have to come up with some other mechanism to enforce that policy. Whereas when you're starting using a managed policy, Amazon takes care of the policy itself, so there is no technical limit on the policy size, since it is all owned by Amazon and managed by itself. So these are some of the benefits and disadvantages of using inline and managed policies. Choose the appropriate one based on your client needs. I would recommend going with managed policies wherever possible. And if you want to really customize it, then go ahead and take a managed policy and customize it to your needs. So the most interesting part of Amazon IAM is its roles concept. If you have users and groups, which is very common to what we have seen in on-premise, role is quite an interesting thing. Every role will have an policy, or in other words, permissions for that to take into effect. Otherwise, creating a role without any policy doesn't make any difference. It cannot do anything. So if IAM role to be effective or being useful, it needs a policy associated with it. So you can associate it with your keys, or you can IAM role has no associated credentials. It can be accessed with your keys only. What it means is you cannot log into Amazon AWS console or any service using the roles. You can access it using the keys, and they are provided dynamically by Amazon. So whenever a request is made, Amazon will provide the temporary access to that request, and once the request is completed, that the keys will be rotated automatically. So roles is not something you will use it for a human. It will be for two services talking to each other. For example, EC2 server wants to talk to S3 as a service, it will use an S3 role. So this way you can talk to a S3 service instead of using user IDs and permissions. So you can use users can assume the role, applications can assume the role. When I say users can assume the role, let us say you have joined a team and you are a newcomer to the team. You will not be given any activity, but over a period of time, you will become a database administrator or a server administrator or a storage admin. So in that case, you as a person are assuming the role of a database admin or a storage admin or a network admin. So in the cloud world also, you can there will be a user who can assume the other role as they progress in the team, or when they get more privileges in the cloud. Likewise, applications can also assume the roles, and services, when you are running some batch processing, that a batch processing job can assume the role temporarily also to access certain resources. To make it little easier to understand, so let us say there is a policy here, and that policy can be assigned to an IAM user. So typically you have created an user ID, and that user ID will have some policies assigned to it, some privileges assigned to it. Say for example, you can create an S3 bucket, or you can delete an S3 bucket, or start a server. So this is a straightforward way. an user which has some policies or some permissions allocated to it. The same policy can be allocated to a group also. So this way, a group of people can be managed by having one policy allocated to the group. You don't have to manage it individually. You are just managing the group policy now. So likewise, you can extend this policy to a role also. That means that you create a role and you can assign this role a particular policy that you have created. Remember that role is not for users, that is a human people, but usually it is not given to humans, but that is also possible to assign roles to users also temporarily. So now that you have created a role and it has necessary permissions, this role can be associated with an user or it can be assumed by an AWS resource also. So this way you have the flexibility of not managing individual user IDs, but you're managing only roles. So every user can temporarily be elevated to a pseudo privileges or a database admin or network admin. And once they log off or temporarily they just you can have timed limits also, so that the roles will expire after a certain period of time. So this way you will have more security in your cloud. Let's go ahead and quickly do a demo on IAM. We will create users, we'll create groups, and we will try to create roles also and try to associate some policies with each one of them quickly. So now I have logged into my IAM dashboard. This is how it will look like when you log into your dashboard. I have customized my account login URL. Here for you, it should be saying something like your account number dot aws.console.aws.com console. So you can go ahead and click on customize and change it to whatever you want. So I'm just going to copy this for future reference. So and the other thing that I said is it is a global service. You don't have to choose a particular region for IAM. As you can see here, it just mentions global, and IAM does not require region selection. So the first thing what we are going to do is going to create an user for us to log in. So let's go ahead and click on users. And as usual, there's a big blue button on the top, which is going to say add user. So click on add user now. And I'm going to say trainee-user. So that's what I'm going to say. And at the bottom, it says whether I want to give programmatic access or console level access to my account. So for now, I don't want programmatic access. All I'm going to say is I want to give only console level access so that I can give a user ID and password so that everybody can log in and access it. So I don't want an auto-generate password because let us make it easy. I'm just going to say Rainy. I'm just going to show it to you guys because it is going to be a temporary user ID. So I'm going to enable this trainee-user-1, and it needs one upper character. So let us say 1A. I'm just going to put it here so that we can use it later. So we have chosen our password. The next step is it says user must create a new password. The next sign in. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want all of you to reset the password. So let us click on next permissions. So here, as I said, by default, if I want to set up my account, there will be no privileges set. If I just click on the next button and go ahead and complete it, I will not have any privileges in my account. That is my default setup. So that is what I'm going to do now. So click on next, and it gives me a friendly warning saying this user has no permissions. You haven't given this user any permission. That means that user will not have any AWS service or resource. So if I go ahead and click on create user now, it will say that user ID has been created. Let us go back to our dashboard. And if I refresh my screen, you can see here there is a one user ID called trainee user. Let me just filter only for trainee for the day. So if I click on this and if I click on trainee user, it will give me the details about my account, this particular user. So there are 4 different tabs. We will come to this later. For now, I want you to log in from the URL and the user ID password I pinged you just now. Can somebody quickly do that for me, please? I'm going to log in with the same user ID that just now we created. It is called as trainee admin, and I'm just going to put in the password that we just now created so that we'll see what is happening. And be sure to try it in a different browser. Oh, it says I gave the wrong password. Let me just try it again. Interesting. So finally, I managed to log in. I'm going to use, let us say, S3 service. It is the most interesting service, and we saw how to use S3. So let us click on that and see what comes up on the dashboard. So it's spinning and trying to access my checks now. It is trying to find out what is the policy associated with me, and then it says that access denied. You can try it with your account also. I mean, with your browser, you should be getting the same message. So let me just go ahead and quickly add a policy to this user now so that this user can access only certain things. So for doing that, you can see here, I'm in the users window. Under users, we are under trainee now, and under trainee we have four options: permissions, group, and credentials. And the permissions, we are going to click on add permissions now. So it brings us back to this window and is saying what kind of permissions do you want to create, whether I want to create a permission from an existing user here, or I want to create an permissions from an inline policy. I mean, attach an existing policies here. So how do I want to do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose attach existing policies directly. That is what I'm going to do now. Click on that. When you do this, it is listing out all the policies that are available right now. So if you don't like any of them and you want to write your own, then go ahead and click on create policy. What it will do is it will take you to another dashboard where you can edit or write your own policy fresh. As you can see in the URL, it says policy as $new, and you can use the policy generator, or the policy generator is a quick way of selecting things and doing it. In other words, customizing the entire policy and doing it. This is the complex way of doing things. The easiest way most often is copy from an existing managed policy and edit it. So there is one more easier way. If say for example, for our user, I want to give only S3 access. That is my objective now. I want my user to upload objects or delete objects in my S3 and only in S3. I don't want to give any other permissions. So something as simple as this, definitely you will have a managed policy available in Amazon. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to my previous window and search for S3 related policies using the search option. And once I type S3, Amazon says that these are all the policies that are available. You can see here the bottom 4 or 5 are S3 CRR. When we did cross-region replication, remember I spoke about Amazon creating policies automatically. This is what it does, and it is visible only in my account. The box symbol that you see is the ones that are created by Amazon itself, and it is available for all of you. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable S3 read-only access. So what it means is in my S3 bucket, anybody who's having my user ID and password will be able to view objects or download objects which are having public access. So let us go ahead and do that just now. So I have added the policy. Now can anybody refresh the screen and let me know whether they are able to see the S3 dashboard? Meanwhile, let me also go to my other browser window and go ahead and hit on the refresh button that is on the S3 dashboard. So we have assigned our policy and it usually takes into effect instantaneously. So there we go. You see here, I am able to see all the objects that are in my bucket now. I'm going to try and access a particular bucket. Let us say access logs that where we put all the logs. I'm just going to click on that. And let us say, you see here all the logs automatically, the lifecycle policies have kicked in and all of them are in the Glacier bucket. I mean, not Glacier bucket, Glacier service, and some of the policies are still to take effect. So if I go ahead and click on one of them, and if I go ahead and click on the, see this object doesn't have, I mean, this is on Glacier, right? So you cannot retrieve it immediately. You cannot download it or make it public. That means that you need to have a retrieval time of 3 to 5 hours. Let me try to go ahead and access a object which is in standard S3 standard. At the bottom we have here, I was thinking I was clicking on that. So if I go ahead and click on download, I should be able to download it. So you see here it is already finished downloading and it is asking me to open it. So let us click on open, and you see here I have access to my object that is in my bucket. So typically what happens is, if you have a client and you want to share some S3 access to a particular bucket, so you can give them restricted privileges like this and share the credentials and expire it after 24 hours. It's very effective, and you can dynamically revoke it and add more privileges also for your clients. So when we come to groups on the left hand side, it is very simple. It is same thing. What I can do is I am going to create a group called trainees and click on next step. And by default, I'm going to give my trainees S3 full access. So this means that everybody who are part of this trainee group will be able to delete an object from my bucket or do any modifications to my S3 service. So that is what I'm going to do now. Click on next and click on create group. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a user to this trainees group. So remember, we already have one user which is called as trainee-user. So we are just going to add that user to this group now. So by default, it will bring up the list of users. All I have to do is just select the trainee-user and then click on add users. And right away, I should be giving them the permissions to edit objects in my S3 bucket. So quickly, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to create a bucket in my account and ask one of you to delete it. So I am going to call it IAM, okay, small characters. So that is there in Virginia. Let me go ahead and click on create. So you see here we have IAM policy test bucket here. So can one of you go ahead and quickly delete my bucket? So let's go ahead and see roles. Now that we were able to demonstrate quickly that the user ID the group bucket got created and we were able to delete the bucket. I am not able to see it in my screen, so it has been successfully deleted. And let us go ahead and see how to use roles and set up an EC2 server which can have an S3 role to access my account. So once again, there are a lot of roles in my account, not a problem. We can remove some of those roles from my account. Leave that and let us go ahead and create a new role now. So this is going to be quite interesting now, because we are going to need our server to talk to S3 service. So we are going to use an S3 service role. So allow S3 to call AWS services on your behalf. No, in that case we need EC2. Yeah. Allow EC2 instances to call AWS services on your behalf. Yeah, that is what we need. And next is permissions. Here we will assign the permission of S3 full access to our role. So S3 full access. Okay. What do I want to name this role? Valaxy IAM role demo. Okay, that should do. And I'm going to click on create role. That's it. We have created a role and we have associated an S3 policy also, so that any server which has been started with this role will have access to my S3 account dynamically. So let us go to EC2 and start a server for launch instance, which is going to be default steps, just that only one more tab we are going to change. So I'm in Virginia, good. I'm going to launch a Linux instance, and I'm going to use a free tier instance. That is the default. Click on configure instance. leave the default, just enable the public IP so that we can connect to it. And below that, you can see the interesting part, IAM role. So far we have left it as none. Today what we are going to do is click on the drop down. It will give you all the roles that are available for EC2. So just now we created Valaxy IAM role demo. So I'm going to choose that one now. So that's it, and then click on next. Storage, we don't want to do anything. Then let's add a tag so that we know what is this server is running. So this is demo server. So it is easy to identify in our dashboard. In security group, I want port 22 access. So let us go ahead and use a security group which has port 22 access if not added. So here I have port 22 access. So leave it as it is. Click on review and launch. So once it comes up with the public IP address, we can start connecting to it. We have got our public IP address, so let us just go ahead and copy it and put it into our terminal so that we should be able to use that. So it's coming up still. Yep, there we go. We got connected. Let me just increase the font size. So great. So since my server has started with IAM role which is having S3 access, so what I can do is I can access the S3 buckets using S3 commands, but since this is Red Hat, that the binaries will not be there, we will need to add the AWS CLI binaries. For example, if I type AWS here, it would not work. The best thing to do is to start an Amazon Linux. Let me just quickly go ahead and start an Amazon Linux because the AWS CLI is pre-installed. We don't want to spend time and installing it today. We will see that in a different class. Today we'll just go ahead and start an Amazon Linux server. So now that we have shifted to Amazon Linux, we will have our AWS command working successfully because it has a role and the necessary privileges and everything should be in place. So now you see here when I type AWS, it is asking me, giving me an error saying there are too few arguments and not giving an error saying command not found. So what I'm going to do now is the command to list all the buckets is AWS S3 ls, and it should list all my buckets in my account. Oh, really? 1 second. Looks like I have not selected the IAM role properly. You can see here my server is Valaxy IAM role demo Amazon Linux server and IAM role is empty. So let us go ahead and attach it quickly. I thought I didn't do this, but it looks like I accidentally removed it from this server also. So now that it has been applied, and if I select this guy, it should, once it starts showing here, we should be able to go to our server and access it. Let me just rerun the same command, and now it should work and get me the bucket access now. There you go. You see here the list of all the buckets in my account is listed here. So you can run simple commands like AWS S3, the make bucket. If you don't know, you can do --help. If I remember correct, that is the help option for AWS command. Okay, I think it is otherwise just help. Oh, made an error again. This is showing me help for entire AWS command itself. I just want to show you how to check commands for S3 alone. Come on. My prompt is showing an error. Just logging into another session. This session is for some reason hung. Anyway, that should not bother us. Let us move AWS S3 HELP, and it should list all the commands that is associated with S3 service itself. Say for example, if I want to copy an object, CP, move an object, MV, and remove an object, RM. So likewise, for creating a bucket, it is create bucket, RM, and then move bucket and move objects. So let us go ahead and create a bucket. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a bucket. AWS S3 make bucket S3 colon slash slash Valaxy test bucket for roles. Okay, my screen is frozen again. So now we have created a Valaxy test bucket. It has been successful. If I list my buckets, it should be visible now. AWS S3 LS. Come on. So can anybody refresh the dashboard that they might have logged in from their browsers and see the Valaxy test bucket is visible? And it should show the region as Virginia. So what we are going to do now is we are going to copy a messages file into the S3 bucket. We are just going to push some files there. Just going to see if my screen is working. So I'm just listing it out so that I know what is the bucket name. So what I'm going to do is AWS S3 CP, the source and the destination. The source is /var/log/ messages, and my destination is going to be S3 colon / var test bucket. And press enter. It should start copying it, and it will show you the complete success. Can you check in my bucket now? So I can do this also. S3 ls As you can see here, I just listed the bucket and it is showing me the messages object is there on my bucket. So this is how you use a role for a particular service, and we access the other service like S3, upload objects or delete objects. Say for example, I don't want this bucket now. I've done processing with this object now. All I have to do is AWS S3 remove bucket. The remove bucket command is RB, and then paste the bucket name. Okay, I made an error in pasting. S3 RB. Let me just copy this and put it back, and that bucket will be done now. So all of these things are done programmatically. Okay, the bucket okay -- force will do this. I'm going to just the -- force command will ensure that you are able to delete the bucket even when there are objects inside that bucket. So there you go. You see here, when we are trying to delete an bucket which is having objects, it didn't allow me. But just like in Linux, when you use an -f, rm-f, all the errors are suppressed and it gives full privilege to delete everything there. So if you go ahead and refresh your dashboard, you should not be able to see the bucket anymore now. So there are some best practices in IAM. They are broadly listed out on your screen right now. When you're talking about basic user and permissions, create user IDs whenever necessary, and almost always give the least privileges. When people are not able to do something, they will obviously will come and question saying that I'm not able to do this, give this privileges. Then you can give them instead of giving more privileges and trying to restrict them later. So create user IDs, grant list privileges, and manage the users using groups. Do not assign policies to individual users. Instead, use groups and assign policies to those users. And enable CloudWatch or CloudTrail. That is another service we will see when you're looking at the monitoring topic in detail. But if you have access to CloudTrail, go ahead and enable it for additional security in your account. So that is on the basic user and permissions level. When you're talking about credentials, change your password. First is you set up your complex password. It is very easy to set your password policy. Let me just go ahead quickly and show you where you can change your password policy here. So under account settings, you have this password policy as the first step. Okay, let me the twisty got folded. Let me enable it. So you see here there are multiple business rules. So minimum password length, whether you want one upper character or one lower character, alphanumeric, and all those things. You can also force your users to change their password periodically, or whenever they reset the password and they log in for the first time, you can force them to change the password. So use these password policies effectively so that your security for your cloud is enhanced. And the rotation is mandatory, or it is almost necessity to rotate your credentials quite often. Whether you are using access key or secure key, it is a mandatory to access them. And multi-factor authentication, that is also possible for root accounts and for privileged users. What it means is, once you enable this, or you need to start having a two-factor authentication, or in other words, it will be an OTP through SMS, or a random generated key fob will be integrated with your Amazon account. So only when they enter both these values, you will be able to access your account. So use that whenever necessary. For example, root accounts in corporate or enterprises almost always will use MFA, as it is shortly called. Delegation, it's a very powerful concept. Create roles, create sharing access, that is IAM roles wherever necessary to share access. Say, for example, there is a monitoring team and you want to give the users in a rotational shift access to your monitoring services. So create a group and create a monitoring role and assign permissions to that role, and let the group assume this role and put all the user IDs under that monitoring group. So this way you are not monitoring the team itself, you are just managing the monitoring role, and everybody under that group will automatically get that permissions. So delegate appropriately, and whenever some instances like the use case we demonstrated, some EC2 wants access to S3, go ahead and create a role for that EC2 and provision that. And if possible, reduce or remove the use of root account. Strictly forbid the use of root account for doing anything. Always create another user ID, give it full privileges, and use all the activities with those account instead of using the root account itself. So create multiple user IDs with different levels of privileges and delegate the authority for each of them. We are going to use this server that we just now used and create a user with access key and secure key, and configure that server with that to access my S3 buckets. So for that, let us go ahead and go to users, click on add user. So I'm going to call this user once again trainee user, and this time I'm going to say programmatic access, not console access. So this way my access key and secure key will be created. So click on next. Permissions, for this user I don't want to give any permissions as of now, so default permissions is null. So I'm just going to click on create user now. So once I click on create user, it will bring me back to this screen where it gives me the access key and secure key. So I'm just going to click on show for quickly because I don't have any privileges associated with this account. So I'm just going to show it publicly and share it with you guys. So let me just remove this text. Okay, so now we have it safe. What we are going to do is we are going to give an S3 read-only access to my trainee user, so that we can go ahead and access my S3 buckets. Okay, that is not the one, and I need to choose this one. I'm sorry, this is add user to the group. This one is the add existing policies to the group. So let us type S3 and S3 read-only access and click on next, review add permissions. So we have an user ID which has access and a secure key. If I come to security credentials, that is the third tab, it will show me the security credentials in the bottom here. So you can see here it lists only my access key. So the secure key will be shown to you only once, so you need to make a note of it. Otherwise you will have to delete this and recreate another one using this button, create access key, in case you forgot to make a note of it. So let us go to our server, and for configuring it, remember, if you have Amazon Linux, it is easy because the binary is already there. So the next step to configure is, what you need to do is you just type AWS space configure, and it will list me my existing configuration if it is there. If it is not, it will just prompt me saying what is my access key. So I'm just going to paste the one that we just now created, and hopefully it should work. So the default region, I'm going to set it to US East 1. You can set it to any region, there is no restriction, and just leave the last one as null. Just press enter here. So now we have set up. So if I type AWS S3 LS, it should list my buckets now, because we have created a user ID and given the necessary privileges, and it should be able to interact with my bucket. So if I want to see some objects within my particular bucket, all you have to do is something like this, and it goes to my the first thing that happens here is the access credentials will be checked, and what is the permissions that are there for these credentials, that will be checked. Once that credentials are confirmed, temporarily I will be given an access to my S3 account, and the data that needs to be done, whether it is a pull or a delete, that will be done, and the prompt will come back, and that user access will be dynamically deleted also. So whenever an S3 request for access key and secure key is made, your privileges are temporarily provided and revoked once the request is completed. So this way there is no permanent user ID and password which this server will have to S3. Every time a request is made, an user ID and access key is created and deleted dynamically for you, increasing the security for your services. So that is how cloud enhances security for you using IAM roles.